Hi there, and welcome to a new episode of Show Me the Crypto. This week we chat with Mauricio Di Bartolomeo, co-founder of Ledn, about his backstory. He grew up in Venezuela, double-digit inflation, and he talks about how he discovered Bitcoin and how it was such an important lifeline for his family, and then getting into the backstory of Ledn. Ulf, what stood out to you in this episode?
Well, what you just touched on, getting into his backstory and how personal Bitcoin and crypto is to him because of the impacts it had on his life, was fascinating to hear about. But going beyond that, we then lead into Ledn, the company and the products that he's founded and created to help people who own Bitcoin to make financial plays and take out loans without having to sell their Bitcoin. And we talk a lot about everything that happened over the last year with the fallout of many centralized exchanges and centralized lending and borrowing services in the crypto space, and how Ledn survived that. And Ledn didn't have the same problems because they actually practice good risk mitigation type policies and practices in their organization. So it was very fascinating to go into all of that as well. And I think it was a great episode for lots of those reasons.
Yeah, one thing you'll notice about this episode is Mauricio's passion really shines through because he's lived it. He's lived the situation, and sometimes we forget, if you're based in North America, how much of the world this impacts. He talks about the fact 87% of the world's living under an authoritarian regime, and that cryptocurrency is not just a speculative investment, it's a way to protect their money from inflation, their money decreasing to 10% of its original supply. So we hope you enjoy this interview with Mauricio.
Show me the crypto. Show me the crypto. Show me the crypto.
In a world on the brink of disruption, two men will bring you clarity by interviewing some of the most intelligent and influential names in the blockchain world. Welcome to Show Me the Crypto with your hosts, Wade Patterson and Ulf Lonergan.
Well, hi there, and welcome to Show Me the Crypto. My name is Wade Patterson.
And I'm Ulf Lonergan.
We're a couple of friends from Canada who love learning about cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology, and we're happy you're along for the ride. Whether you're a crypto virgin or you know your way around the block, we hope our interviews with some of the most intelligent and influential people in the blockchain space help deliver you with value. And on this episode, we're joined by Mauricio Di Bartolomeo, co-founder and CSO at Ledn. Born and raised in Venezuela, Mauricio experienced double-digit inflation throughout his entire life, but discovered Bitcoin thanks to his younger brother. Once Mauricio understood how Bitcoin could transact in a hostile environment, he immediately grasped the use case. Mauricio co-founded Ledn in 2017 with the conviction that digital assets have the power to democratize access to the global economy. Mauricio, welcome to Show Me the Crypto.
Welcome, Wade, or thank you, Wade. Thank you, Ulf, for that kind intro. Glad to be here and to be chatting with Canadians about a topic that's very near and dear to me.
We're so excited. It's rare that we get a fellow Canadian on the podcast, so this is a treat for us. And I want to go back to something I mentioned there in the bio, and that is your story growing up in Venezuela and the inflation you experienced and then getting introduced to Bitcoin. I just hit the wave tops. Can you give us the deep dive of that story?
Definitely. And I'll try to keep it brief because I can just, my wife says you have to tap me once to start and you got to tap me twice to stop. But yeah, I mean, my story starts in a very small town, actually not so small, small city in Venezuela, but the fourth biggest city. It's called Barquisimeto. It's dead in the center of the country. And that's where I was born and raised and spent most of my life. The country, as many know, started going downhill once the authoritarian dictator got democratically elected. At first, his name's Hugo Chavez. Most people know him as "It Smells Like Sulfur" guy after George Bush at that UN hall or whatever it was. And many families saw the writing on the wall when he came into power. A lot of families moved to Florida to spend his term out because many people thought he would be a one-term thing. He would be gone when democracy would do its thing. But that's not what happened. My family was one of those families. We spent a couple of years in Florida, but then it got very hard for my dad to run his business remotely as Venezuela was just falling apart. So we had to go back. And once we were back, we could see the deterioration just like charging ahead. And I was looking around and I didn't want to stay there to go to university. So I tried very hard to go back to the States. My dad basically said, we can't afford to send you back to Florida, but why don't you go check out Canada? You have a cousin there. And so I landed in Toronto, kind of against my will, really, because as I was going through universities to try to enroll, they kept telling me that year was the OAC year, which was the year they deprecated grade 13 and grade 12. And so they had twice as many grads going for university. So everybody in universities was saying, just go back home, kid. You're never going to get in, forget it. And this isn't your year. And so I'm like, I called my dad that night and I said, Dad, no, after a few visits to universities, and I'm like, Dad, I got to go. I'm not going to stay here. But basically, I forget exactly which riot broke out that night that I called my dad. So later on, he calls me back and he says, you can't come back. I don't care what they're telling you to do or what kind of ringer you have to go through. You're not coming back. And so anyway, I stayed in Canada and did my university here. Fast forward, Venezuela kept falling apart throughout this time. Fast forward to 2015, and it's now my youngest brother's time to graduate. He doesn't want to leave the country, even though the entire family wants him to leave the country. And he keeps, my dad used to encourage us to start a small business when we graduated out of university. He would fund our first venture. And so my brother started pitching him ideas. None of the ideas involved leaving the country, until finally he puts his foot down and says, I'm either doing this or I'm leaving the house. And that pitch was to buy Bitcoin mining equipment. And my dad sends me this white paper. He says, I don't know what your brother's trying to do. He seems to be very adamant about this. Can you help me sort of diligence this thing? I read the white paper. I went on the Bitmain website to check out these ASIC computers. And what I saw when I read it was subsidized inputs in electricity and internet were heavily subsidized in Venezuela at the time, and then a universally sellable output in Bitcoin, which was there was nothing you could make in Venezuela at the time that you could sell internationally for a fair price because of all the capital controls. So to me, when I saw the math, I said, okay, subsidized inputs, globally sellable output seems like a decent idea relative to everything else. Off he goes and he starts mining. Summer of 2015. Christmas, I land back that year to check out what's been going on. His facility is now twice as big. He's the only kid in Venezuela with a smile, as all of my friends are fire selling all their assets, throwing darts on a map to see where they can migrate to. My brother's actually looking for spaces to lease to set up more miners. And at this point, I'm like, what are you really doing? Right? Because I didn't believe it. And he says, I'm mining Bitcoin. Let me show you. And I've said this story several times. I go into his dusty room. I said, show me. He says, give me your bank account. I give him my local bank account. He sells Bitcoin for the fair market value in dollar terms. He turns those dollars into bolívares at the fair market value, which is the black market, but it's not the black market under capital control. That is the market. There is no real, that is the real market. The fake market is the government market. But long story short, he sells this Bitcoin for the right amount of bolívares. Bolívares hit my bank account. That's when things go blurry. And from that moment on, when I saw Bitcoin, like you've mentioned, in this hostile of an environment, when I saw Bitcoin do what no other asset, even dollars, were able to do in that environment, I had no more questions in my mind. I basically got what it did. And from that day on, I've been focused on spending more and more time on Bitcoin and doing more and more things to be a part of the system, the ecosystem.
That's an amazing story. I love hearing about your background, and clearly there's a lot of passion there, and you can understand why you got into the space. But touching on that, how did that then lead to you and Adam Reed's founding Ledn?
It's a great story. So as many people that start mining Bitcoin or get their hands on their first little bit of Bitcoin, there's one thing that goes through your mind. You want more. right? Like there is no such thing as enough Bitcoin for any Bitcoiner. In similar ways as there's no such thing as like sort of enough real estate for a real estate mogul, or there's not enough gold for a gold bug. You know, you just want more and more of it. And so when you start mining Bitcoin, which is how I got into it, and many people did, in fact, because at the very beginning, it was very scary to think of this abstract good that you had to exchange, you know, hard money for, but it was this virtual asset that you couldn't touch, you couldn't see. A lot of people found comfort in buying these machines that you could connect into a wall and you can see them humming and you could see it was hardware, you could touch them, right? And so many, including myself, right? Like I felt a lot more comfortable having some sort of hardware that produced this Bitcoin vis-a-vis having just the Bitcoin, because I didn't come from a computer science background, right? My dad was a real estate developer, and he held a couple of factories, so he was very much like a physical guy, and so it was very familiar to buy the machines, to make them hum, to do the electrical upgrades. You felt like you were doing something physical, and that's kind of where the value came from. It's very hard to sort of connect this idea that value just grows abstractly on a cloud and you become wealthier because of some numbers on the screen. You find comfort in the physical. So when you're trying to expand these mines, and anyone listening that has mined or tried to buy a mining hardware will know, at the time, especially back then, hardware had a very long lead time, meaning that you would pay in January and you would get your machine in December, right? Or get your machine in September. And then that payment had to be made in Bitcoin. And so what would happen is you would basically pay Bitcoin in January when Bitcoin was $100, and you had to sit there and wait. And while you sat there and wait, Bitcoin went from 100 to 1,000. And at that point, it didn't even matter what machine you got back or what the difficulty was. You were never going to see that appreciation with the machine, right? You had foregone the power of the Bitcoin appreciation because you wanted to reinvest in your Bitcoin business. How ironic was that? And most people did this over and over. And as you tried to grow your mind, you almost felt like you were being punished by the market cycle because you were trying to invest in more Bitcoin, but in all of the sort of value accrual happened while you were waiting, and you lost all of the upside. And that happened time and again as I was helping people build their minds. And what all of us wanted at the time was somebody to take our Bitcoin as collateral and give us a loan. And in a similar way that somebody with a house can, if you're in a cash crunch and you own a house, you don't go out and you sell your house to pay for your credit card bill. You go and take a home equity line of credit, which is a much lower rate than your credit card. You pay down your credit card, and then off you go. And you use your equity in your house to sort of finance or restructure your debt. Nobody was accepting your equity in your Bitcoin for any type of loan or any type of lending vehicle, which I thought was absolutely lunacy, because it was the best asset to take as collateral. There was no better collateral asset in my view that you could use internationally, sell it 24/7, have that level of liquidity. But nobody was doing this. And so when Adam and I started building our facility here in Canada, and we ran into the same issue. We wanted to grow it. We needed financing. And we went into a few options to try to get some financing, and people laughed us out of the room when we said, we have all this Bitcoin. Can you take it as collateral? People said, that's not an asset. That's not an asset. And that's stuck with me. Like that got engraved in my mind, because at that point, I said, we looked at each other and kind of dawned on us that if we could solve this financing Bitcoin problem, we were going to help way more people than we were with our mining operation. And that was something where we really had an edge, because Adam had been financing renewable energy projects for a decade. And I had been talking to miners for at that point 4 or 5 years. So I knew how to structure the value proposition for the miners. He knew how to structure the financing proposition for the lenders. And so we came together and created Ledn. And our product and our premise was very simple. We are going to lend you dollars backed by your Bitcoin. We Ledn so you can hodl. That was the whole premise of Ledn, is issuing a Bitcoin backed loan. And that's what we did. That was our flagship product. We did Canada's first Bitcoin backed loan in 2018. And that was really the reason. Many people say businesses are just solutions to problems. And the sort of, you can see why we're so passionate about it is because we ended up solving our own problem. And in the process, we ended up helping other people's problems. So I think that's a very beautiful way of sort of organically growing a business because it comes from a solution to an existing issue. Like I said, oftentimes a lot of the innovation in crypto and blockchain, unfortunately, has been solutions looking for a problem rather than a solution to an actual problem, right? So I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, that's super good. And we're going to dive more into Ledn specifically. But before we do that, I want to kind of have our audience have the opportunity to kind of grasp how this is internationally. So we mentioned at the top of the episode that, we're both in Canada, and, people in Canada might wonder, well, what's the use case for something like Bitcoin? Our dollar is, as far as they feel, fairly reliable. And I saw in a video that you were saying that 87% of the world lives under an authoritarian regime, and that 13%, which we fall into, is actually, we're kind of financially privileged in a way. And so can you just maybe kind of paint the picture of how does banking in somewhere like Canada differ from Venezuela?
What a great question. So money isn't stable. For 87% of the world, this idea that your dollar today is the same as your dollar tomorrow, the fact that you don't have to think in US dollars is an incredibly unique thing to Canada, Europe, and just a few OECD countries that you could probably fit in one or two hands, right? Most other people in the world spend their days literally thinking in US dollars and in their local currency. So to give you an example, Venezuela's inflation rate today, after the hyperinflation wave is over, we just have like a relaxing 100% inflation rate year over year, right? Like if you look at Argentina, they're relaxing with 120% plus inflation rate, and most of LATAM is dealing with like mid double digit inflation. That is part of our culture. So I grew up dancing to songs about inflation. Most songs in Venezuela or Latin America start with, "Our peso's worth nothing. The dollar's going to the moon." Like these were quotes that I've been listening to since I grew up. So it's structural. It's systemic. It's like it's part of you, right? So you know how to operate in these two worlds. The other thing is that when inflation is so bad, what people want to do is protect themselves. So what you do is you go out and you buy dollars. But when you go out and you try to protect yourself by buying dollars, that action drives up the local currency exchange rate. It makes it worse. And what is an exchange rate if not the report card for a government's work in the global scale? So governments don't want you to protect yourself because it makes them look bad. So what do if they start producing inflation and you start trying to protect yourself from it? They try to prevent you from buying dollars. And the first thing they'll say is they'll have restrictions. And Canadians have never heard about this. Like you would never think of showing up to TD and somebody telling you, "I'm sorry, sir, you can only purchase 2,000 American dollars. If you would like to stay longer in the US, you cannot do that. That your limit for this year is 2,000 American dollars. That is as much as you can buy at this rate." Naturally, people need more than that. There's no sort of cap on the amount of money you can potentially need. So what do? Once you're capped in your bank, you'll try to talk to somebody that has some room in their capacity, and then you'll try to negotiate and buy dollars from them. But they won't sell you the dollars at the same rate the bank does. They'll sell you at a premium. And that's what creates the secondary market. Whenever a capital control is introduced, instantly it creates a secondary market for people that want to go above and beyond it. And then you create two exchange rates, right? And so the government will want to track everything on their fake exchange rate because it makes them look good. But day to day, your prices will be happening in the second exchange rate because that's the one where everybody can actually transact in dollars. So what happens is, in this environment, you're not able to have dollars in your bank account. Even if you do, you don't trust the banks to have, or your local government to have your dollars in a local bank, because you can you can have what happened to Argentina happen to you. In Argentina, Corralito, and it's happened to us too, is they said, hey, don't worry, you will accept your dollars here at Argentinian banks. They're going to be safe and you're going to earn interest rate with us and you can transact with them. But then one day you wake up and they said, actually, the central bank ran out of dollars. So we're going to purchase your dollar balance from your banks for this many pesos. And then they'll say, well, who came up with that exchange rate? Well, we did. But that's not the exchange rate. I mean, instantly when they announced that, dollars 10x in value. And so you got 10% of your dollar value. They wiped out the value of your savings by taking your dollars. So what happens in these countries is that nobody wants to use the local system. Nobody wants to use the local currency. And economies start gradually getting dollarized. Whether the government wants to or not, right? In the case of Venezuela, the government, fought it as long as it could, but today the whole country is de facto dollarized. Conversely, a place like Ecuador in the year 2000 decided that they needed to dollarize the economy to get rid of inflation. They took on the dollar as legal tender. Inflation went from 100% year over year to literally 10% year over year within a month. And so whether you want to or not, if you are irresponsible with your finances as a government, people will go to the more responsible currency. And up until now, historically, that had been the US dollar. And it will continue to be the US dollar for the foreseeable future, because that's what people know of. But slowly over time, people are getting more and more comfortable with these transparent, decentralized assets that they are starting to feel that they can trust gradually as much as the dollar, because they feel like they can understand it. Eventually, they're going to come to a point where they're going to say, I can see the monetary policy of this instrument. It's written in code. But to see the monetary policy in the United States, I have to gather in a place of worship, once every 3 months for Mr. Powell to come up with a decision as to his determination for the price of money. And based on the words that come out of his mouth or the color of the smoke that comes out of the chimney, I will be poorer or richer. And so it's Bitcoin is just a cleaner, more transparent way or asset to have your reserves in. And over time, I think you're going to have more and more people save in assets, transact in money, right? And nobody saves in money. We have been fed this lie that you can save in fiat currency and get ahead. But that is the biggest lie that's been sold in finance today. Because your money is depreciating at 10% year over year. Unless your bank is paying you more than that, you're not going to be able to save up for that house. By the time you're done saving those $50K for your down payment, that house that you wanted 3 years ago is going to require $100K down payment. And so you're always falling behind because the interest rate you're getting is never making up for inflation, because they are lying to you on what the real inflation rate is. Anyway, I'll pause.
No, I love it. That was a great response to that question. And I do want to switch gears a little bit back to Ledn now. And something I want to discuss just at a high level is that lending and borrowing in the crypto space, especially over the last year, I mean, it hasn't gone well for everyone. We've got examples like BlockFi, Celsius, exchanges, FTX that have crumbled, and many people lost money or had their money held up. So what makes Ledn different? Why won't that be the case for Ledn, and why hasn't it been to date?
It's a great question, and really, the events from last year were very unfortunate, and they were done mostly by bad actors that had very poor risk management and misrepresented the risk. These people lied to their clients, in many ways. And it's for the courts to decide, but everything points to the fact that there was like blatant fraud in FTX. And so fraud can happen in any industry. And, it's happened in Wirecard, and, in publicly listed companies. It's happened in Enron. It's happened in a variety of Bernie Madoff, sat on the chair. It was sat on the board of the NASDAQ, and that's, these are things that happen in most industries. What happened with 2022 was that you had a combination of very loose risk management policies, a complete absence of checks and balances from self-regulation or external regulation. There was none of it, right? Like there were, in the absence of government regulation, companies have to self-regulate, and there was very little self-regulation happening in most companies. I'll give you an example. A group like Voyager had 58% of their loan book tied up to one counterparty at the time of their bankruptcy, which was Three Arrows Capital. If people had known how much money was concentrated to that other group, they would have most likely made a different decision, or they could have made a different decision, right? If there was very little risk management in that. One, a lot of these companies were taking on. I'm going to try to sort of list out or distill the biggest problems that were made. Number one is concentration risk. That companies were massively concentrated into one group, and if that group went, that was the fate of your entire business, right? And so concentration risk is one of the key tenets of a proper risk management policy. It was not being followed back then. The other one was asset and liability, asset and maturity mismatching. So an example is some companies were rushing to get assets on their platform, and they were listing tokens that were getting spun up every day or every week. And there was no institutional appetite to borrow these tokens. So for example, some platforms launched savings accounts or yield accounts for things like Shiba Inu or Dogecoin. And then you turn around and you go to these world-class institutions or market makers that are the groups that we like to work with. And they would turn around and say, I have no demand for this. Come back to me when you have stable coins, or come back to me when you have Bitcoin. So what did these groups do? They had a choice. They stopped paying interest on those accounts, or they convert those exotic assets into something that does have demand. And by doing so, you create what's called an asset liability mismatch. You owe somebody Dogecoin, but you traded that for Bitcoin. And that's terrible because if somebody wants that Dogecoin back and you have Bitcoin, you now have to go out and buy the same Dogecoin, and you better be able to do that for a lower price than you sold it at. Because if that's not the case, then you're decapitalized. And that was one of the things that basically introduced an immense amount of risk to these operations. The second one was some companies, and you'll know this because they publicly said they had these mining operations. They were taking open term deposits, money that you could withdraw at any time, and they were investing that money in mining projects that have 5 to 6 year paybacks. So if you showed up with $5 million and made a deposit, and the company turned around and invested those $5 million into a mining project, but then tomorrow you decided you wanted your money back, they can't go out and liquidate that mining operation to give you your $5 million back right away. So you have what's called a maturity mismatch. So you had asset liability mismatch, you had all sorts of concentration risk, you have all sorts of duration mismatching. And on top of that, you had some companies claiming to their clients that these products had no risk and that these products were FDIC insured. And it created this false sense of safety. And not only that, you had these massive world-class investors backing these firms. And so that fed this illusion further. Then all of a sudden, that whole situation that I just described is like a forest of dead wood just waiting for a spark to become a massive forest fire. And then when FTX collapses, when Three Arrows collapses, that's like basically putting a flamethrower to that forest and then feeding it a windstorm. And then everybody fell down because there was no type of risk management associated with these operations. Ledn is very different. Ledn is what we were called the boring Canadians at the time, a title that we wear proudly today. So reasons why this didn't happen at Ledn is we monitor our concentration risk. Now we've even upgraded this further. So now our accounts have even more protections to our clients, and I can get into those in a second. But at Ledn, we were always very conscious of our concentration risk. The other one is we're very selective on the assets that we support. We only support Bitcoin and stablecoins or USDC today, or up until today, especially back then. those are the deepest and most liquid assets in the lending market. We never had a need to convert assets into something else because there was always demand for those assets. So there was no asset liability mismatch. And we always made sure that when we make a loan, if our clients can withdraw it and we have 7 days to process that withdrawal, we better have 7 days or less time to call back that asset to be able to fulfill that obligation, right? And we are very, very selective on who we lend to. So an example is, Three Arrows came by our desk many times looking to borrow from us. At the time, they didn't provide financial statements, which was an integral part of our process. And what they claimed to us when we said we can't lend to you was, how come you won't lend to us? Everyone else lends to us. And that made us even dig our heels further. And so we never lent to them. Therefore, we never had exposure to groups like them. And it was a combination of just sound risk management and having a conservative approach to the business. We never had a token, so we never played games with our tokens. We never pumped or dumped our tokens to lead to a particular outcome. I think there's a very big overlap between the companies that did that and the companies that are no longer here. The other thing is we started doing proof of reserves attestations way back in 2020. And this is a process whereby an accountant comes to Ledn, checks our client liabilities, what we owe to our clients and their balances. Then they go and they check our balances in custody banks, lending partners, and then they make sure we have more assets than liabilities. And our clients, importantly, can check that we reported their balances to the penny and to the Satoshi. And this was fascinating because as this was happening, as these platforms were falling apart, you saw a bunch of companies rush to try to put out some type of reserve attestation or process. And what they realized, which we figured out way back, was that it is very, very complex and very, very difficult to do that kind of exercise. And it gets harder and more complex as you throw in more assets and more products. So at Ledn, we did it way before we built out our product suite because we wanted to have it at the core and have everything else that we built adapt to that, rather than having to retrofit this process to a bunch of products that were built without that and without transparency in mind. So since then, that process and those transparency features have gotten greatly revamped at Ledn. So today we continue with proof of reserves. We have what's called the open book report, where clients can now see how we're utilizing assets to generate yield. So you can see what percentage of the assets are lent, what percentage are being lent to each particular counterparty. You can't see the actual names, but you can see the assets broken down by institution. And then we also have a separate summary of how we underwrite that credit. Like, how do we vet these companies? Who do we talk to? What do they do? And so it's just more and more layers of transparency for the client. Because with any lending product, there is risk. That is why you get paid a yield. And so we don't want to pretend that there isn't. We want to be upfront about it and tell you what it is so that you can make a call on how much or what of it you would like to use.
I'm wondering if you can break down kind of the return on like the 8% people get for lending out the money. And some people might just think that's an unsustainable number based on what they're used to, right? So can you kind of break down how you get to that 8% number?
Absolutely. And that's, again, something that I encourage anybody thinking of using these services to do. That is the first question you should be asking is, how are you getting this yield? For us, you can see it on our website. So our first product, as I mentioned, is people come to us with their Bitcoin that they don't want to sell to borrow the dollars that they need. The rate at which we lend those dollars is 12.9%. You can go on our website today. You can see it. If you come to Ledn and you have $1,000 worth of Bitcoin, you could borrow $500 based on that collateral, and you pay 12.9% interest on those dollars for the time you hold them. That the reason we're able to pay somebody depositing dollars into the growth account 8.5 is because we lend those assets at 12.9. The difference between 12.9 and 8.5 is how Ledn makes money, how Ledn keeps the lights on, how this business operates. That's on the US dollar side. And if you go into the open book report, you will see that 95% of all the dollars that are deposited at Ledn are financing Bitcoin-backed loans from our retail clients. And the 5% that isn't is in custody or in banks, just ready for facilitating withdrawals and operational needs. But basically, we're fully utilized our USDC balances to finance those loans that pay us 12.9. That's the reason we can pay 8.5 on the dollars. On Bitcoin, we're paying 1%. And there is a good reason for that, because if you go to the open book report in Bitcoin, you will see that it's only 35% of the Bitcoin that is being lent out. The other 65 is in custody, because the thing that Ledn does is when our high quality institutional borrowers have little or no demand for that Bitcoin, we do not go out the spectrum to lend it to someone else that wants it just for the sake of keeping a rate. We will show you that we're not lending X% of this, and we'll adjust the rate accordingly so that you can see and understand why the rate is what it is, right? And there might be other shops that can offer you more of this or more of that. Again, ask why and ask how. We have set our sort of thresholds for what we accept and what we don't. And we only like to work with the highest quality institutions out there. And when they have little to no demand for these assets, we rather adjust our rates and tell our clients why the rate is what it is than to chase ability to lend to someone else just for the sake of keeping a rate. That is a slippery slope. So that is where the yield comes from for those products.
Now, Ledn's, you guys are founded in Canada, but you serve a much greater audience. But bringing it back to Canadians, we're all speaking from this country right now. And I'm sure there's a lot of listeners who are also in this country. But the products that Ledn has offered have had to change due to Canadian regulation in the last year or so. I believe it was probably about a year ago or maybe 10 months ago or so. Can you touch on that a little bit? What happened there and how this has changed Ledn's products for Canadians?
Yes, definitely. So we have a suite of products that has historically just comprised of yield and loan products. So we have people can come to Ledn with their Bitcoin to borrow dollars against it, or people could come with their Bitcoin or USDC to earn interest on it. When as we were going through the process of getting these products regulated with the Canadian regulators, we were basically we had a planned acquisition for a group called Arx Novum, who had a registered portfolio management and registered investment advisor licenses that would presumably allow us to regulate our products and introduce them under a regulated framework. Through that process, we realized that the changes that we would have to make to the product to make it fit into the regulatory box that was available would create a far inferior product experience relative to what we were offering everywhere else. You would have had to turn your Bitcoin into units of a fund. That would have been a taxable event. Then you would have had to take them, when you wanted to withdraw, you would have had to redeem the units and go back to Bitcoin, another taxable event. And so it would create a far inferior product offering for Canadians relative to what everyone else around the world could use. And our view is that these regulatory frameworks are improving and getting built as we speak in real time. We have countries every other day announcing a new framework for these products. Great example is the framework that's out of the Cayman Islands, Cayman Island Monetary Authority, which is where we have our registration. Our global entity is registered out of the Cayman as a virtual asset service provider. That is a designation that exists there. They were very quick to put together a framework specific to digital assets. And that allows companies like Ledn to offer a wider range of products to a much wider audience. So basically, we had to face the decision, which is, do we invest a lot of time and money to create a product that will be significantly inferior to what we have in the market today, or do we focus on perfecting this offering where it can be offered, knowing and understanding that when a more accommodating framework or a more reasonable framework or a better framework for consumers comes to fruition in Canada, we can come back with the best product in the market to now offer it how it should be offered. And so that was the view that we took. And you know, you can tell that some countries are very hungry to bring in this industry because they are trying to create a box in the shape of the industry so that the industry can come fit in. Whereas some others that have a lot to protect because they're already sitting high up in the seniorage ladder or high up in the basically, there are countries where people already want to take their money, like Canada and the US, and they don't really have a need or a pressure to fit this new industry because they're too busy with all their other opportunities. Whereas some other countries are incredibly hungry to become the next financial hub, and they're expeditiously putting up these frameworks, trying to call and lure the industry to you, and they're being very successful at it. Whereas you're trying to see some other regulators, namely, you know, I would say North America is a good example where they're trying to fit a square into a round peg or into a round hole, and you're finding, you know, these squares are finding square holes everywhere else. And so they're not trying to force themselves into your round peg, right? And so I think that's creating this interesting dynamic where everybody's now saying, okay, maybe we should build a custom box for this because there are good actors that are making great business and have billions of dollars to invest in thousands and thousands of clients. And so I think when North American regulators started going on their rampage against crypto earlier this year, I think many thought that the international community was going to do the same. But what you found was these guys started sort of attacking the industry by closing down their banks and you know, suing some of the best actors. And what you saw from the rest of the world was sort of an instant, what are you doing, guys? Come here, right? Like, you know, France put out a framework, Hong Kong put out a framework, all the islands of the Caribbean put out a framework, El Salvador put out a framework, France, you know, I think I mentioned already, but Dubai, the UAE, everybody was saying, come here. And all of a sudden you had the US guys looking at each other being like, BlackRock, you know, where are you? And so, you know, they're trying to like really kind of change the beat to make it such that, you know, they preserve a lot of the leadership they have built up for this industry.
Mauricio, I want to ask you about another product that Ledn's working on, which is the Bitcoin mortgage. And my understanding is that maybe parts of Ontario have access to this right now. So what is the product and when can British Columbians like Ulf and I access it?
So yeah, it's a great question. So the product was launched or was announced last year. It's a product that lets you use your Bitcoin collateral to purchase an equal real estate property of equal value to the Bitcoin collateral you're posting. So an example is if you show up with $500,000 worth of Bitcoin, you can purchase a house worth up to $500,000. Both the Bitcoin and the house become part of the collateral for the loan. And that allows you to effectively use your Bitcoin wealth to diversify into real estate. So the product is available in Ontario. It's a product that, based on all the changes that have occurred in the market, we are in the process of restructuring the terms and the sort of mechanics of the product itself. The market, both in real estate and in the Bitcoin lending market, has changed quite significantly since we announced the product. And again, just very transparently, one of the big things that allows this product to exist is Ledn's ability to lend that Bitcoin, to get an interest paid for that lending of the Bitcoin to subsidize the rate that we then offer our clients for that real estate portion of it. Because again, you will notice we're a Bitcoin-backed lender. Our cost of capital is aligned with the cost of capital to finance Bitcoin-backed loans. There's a difference between that cost of capital and then the cost of capital to finance real estate. And so you have to do whatever you can to kind of bring it as close as possible, to bring the two options as close as possible. So right now, We are restructuring the terms of the mortgage to reflect the changing market conditions. But I have huge faith in the future of this product, especially in places like North America, because once you have Bitcoin and you don't want to sell it, many times you want to diversify into your real estate. And we've had this product, like many of our other products, came from client demand. So we had clients that had a lot of Bitcoin. They were very Bitcoin wealthy, and they were going to the bank and said, "Hey, bank, I have this many $1 million worth of Bitcoin. I want to buy this house," and they don't have a W-2 or a T4 because they're retired. And the bank would say, "I can't lend you money to buy this house, even though you have all this Bitcoin. To me, Bitcoin is not an asset." So many people thought that because they were, they had all this Bitcoin wealth, that the doors would open to get regular mortgages. But what many people don't get is that a mortgage is not a loan on your house. It's a loan on your income backed by the house. So if you don't have the income, you're not going to be able to get it. And it's a specific type of income, because even if you're self-employed or if you have your own business, the bank will laugh at that income. And so this product was a way for us to help our Bitcoiners unlock the purchasing power of their Bitcoin when it came to real estate. Today, somebody in BC could come to Ledn with, however much money they want, say a couple $100,000 to borrow $100,000 for a down payment, and then go to a tier 1 bank and get a mortgage for the delta, right? Like, you can still do that today. With the Bitcoin mortgage, what that does is that it expands the purchasing capacity of that Bitcoin, because if you have $500,000, without the mortgage, you can get 250, right? Because you can go for a straight Bitcoin back loan. But with the mortgage, you can buy a house worth $500,000. So it almost doubles the purchasing power of that Bitcoin collateral for real estate purposes. So again, it's the product that we're working to update, and then once it's updated, we'll expand selectively, because the thing that a lot of people don't get about mortgages is that they're province by province regulated. So it's not like, oh, we got it in Ontario, snap your fingers, it's across Canada. It takes time to get it into compliance with every other provincial or state legislator or regulator, so that we can offer it. So we're working on it. It's going to be more widely available in the future. I just like being very candid as to how the product exists and what the new market conditions mean to the future of the product.
It sounds like it will be quite the process to work it across all the provinces and all the different regulations, but I'm excited for that product. Hopefully when it comes to British Columbia. So I'll look forward to that. I wanted to ask about the fact that Ledn is a CeFi product operating in a DeFi world. It's Bitcoin is decentralized. Your users who own it, that's one of the things they love about it. But they come to Ledn, who is centralized, and you have to trust this party to then provide these services. And there's a lot of benefits that come with it. But I wanted to get your thoughts, someone who, owns and operates in that space, on the DeFi space and the tools and the risks and the benefits involved in those who are in the lending and borrowing space, but on the DeFi side of things.
It's a great question. And I think that they will both serve, I think they're best, both centralized financial offerings versus decentralized financial offerings have a place in the industry. And I think that they are each is better at a particular set of issues. Like CeFi is better at solving a set of problems. DeFi is better at solving a different set of problems. And I'll explain. First, I would like to challenge this idea that DeFi worked during the crash and CeFi didn't. I think that's the wrong labels to put on what worked and what didn't. I think over collateralized lending worked during the down run. Uncollateralized lending was where the issues were. So for example, people like to say, oh, DeFi, there were no bankruptcies in DeFi. Like, yeah, there were. Like, there were protocols that lend money uncollateralized that are no longer here. They had to take huge write-downs, and nobody paid back those loans because they were unsecured. And people were pointing at the fact that Celsius or others were repaying some Aave loans or whatever as a sign that DeFi was working. I would say no, they were paying that because they were paying $1 to get back $2. Like if you had to pay back $1 to get nothing, you wouldn't have paid that. You would have basically gone to the over collateralized ones because you needed to get as many assets back as you could. So you were paying down over collateralized stuff. Nobody was paying down uncollateralized stuff. So it's not that DeFi worked and CeFi didn't. It's over collateralized loans naturally perform better than uncollateralized loans when there was a crisis of collateral, right? Like it makes perfect sense, right? Now, what can DeFi be very good at? DeFi can be very good at programmatic lending that a human can find a very hard time delivering value on. And I'll give you an example. Sometimes you'll want to park cash for 3 days and you want to earn an interest rate on it. No company is going to set up a borrow for 3 days in size. Like it makes no sense. So you would want to do that in pools, right? You would want to add money to pools that have fluctuating interest rates, and you would be able to draw down from the pools. Again, the interest rates would be fluctuating. And that works very well in a variable rate environment. So what DeFi does very well is short-term borrowing and lending at variable rates. That's like something that DeFi and pools programmatically can do more effectively than a human underwriting that risk for that particular time. What CeFi can do very well is long-term lending on fixed rates. Why? Because we can have legal agreements that match our rates to another counterparty, and we'll have visibility to those rates, and we can underwrite that risk and take the right collateral for it. We can take a longer term view on things because we are bound by legal agreements that can be updated and can be challenged in court or can be renegotiated. Whereas you cannot do that on a smart contract because the rules are set in code. And so again, it's very tricky. Anyone that has had any type of agreement signed with anybody could tell you that it's incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to plan out every set of outcomes in the future and that there will be no disputes or that those laws don't have to get updated. There's a reason we have a judicial system. There's a reason why courts and laws or where laws get updated. It's because sometimes they stop working for what they were intended to do. So the same thing is true for code. A code that is set by today's standards is going to be outdated in 5 years. It's going to conflict with certain things. It may not feel fair or right anymore. And so I think that DeFi will be very good at very quick variable stuff that has to be done, for days, and it can be done on variable rates. But nobody's going to want to buy a house on variable rate crypto, or it becomes very difficult. In fact, after what's happening now, I question anybody wanting to do variable rate mortgages for a very long time. And so I do think that there's a place for each, and each has a set of trade-offs that makes it better suited for particular ends of the financial services spectrum.
Mauricio, this has been such an interesting conversation, and we're coming close to the end, but there's a couple things I want to ask you before we get to our last section of questions that we ask every single guest. And that first question is, we've talked about your backstory, your conviction in Bitcoin. We've talked about what Ledn offers, but what about going into the future? Like, what are some future goals, a future focus that Ledn has?
So I think what you see from Ledn is we've always wanted to play in the intersection of your digital assets and your real life, right? It's very hard for you to pick up your phone and look at a balance on an app and think, oh, Bitcoin's making my life great. Yes, your balance is growing, but how do you translate this wealth on this phone to your day-to-day life? So at Ledn, you can use that wealth on that phone to buy a house with a loan. And that improves your real day-to-day life. You can use the same Bitcoin-backed loan instrument to pay for your university without selling your Bitcoin, or to pay for a trip, to buy a car. And so there will be more and more things that you can do with Ledn that will translate your digital wealth into real life benefits. So whether that is by a loan, by allowing you to pay down bills, by allowing you to use your crypto as a payment method easier, by allowing you to send and receive money to your friends and family in different parts of the world in a faster and cheaper way, which we have with P2P transfers, or by bringing services to new countries and letting Canadians earn 8.5% again under US dollars. That will happen at some point in the future as well. So I think that more and more these digital assets are going to start providing real life tangible benefits to people. And there's got to be a connector between your digital wealth and that real world experience. That's where we will be looking to play. So you'll be what does that look like in terms of product? That looks like more options for you. If you, for example, right now, you can choose to earn yield on Ledn, but you can also choose not to earn yield on Ledn and not be exposed to the risks of that operation. And so there'll be more optionality, more transparency. Our DCN product now lets you earn interest in a different way to lending. It's done, because of predictable outcomes. You can set up a price and a time where you would like to buy or sell Bitcoin, and depending on how likely the market thinks that is to happen, you will get a yield based on that. So again, that has a different risk return profile. We want to give people the information so that they can choose what they feel is right for them, always aware of the trade-offs or the risks and benefits of each product. So that's where I think we'll play.
The other thing I want to ask you about is in late 2022, you wrote a blog post giving several bold predictions for 2023. And the first bold prediction that you gave, this is the worst thing about doing predictions. Ulf and I did a prediction episode as well, and we're going to probably be wrong on 80% of them. But this is about you, not us. So the first bold prediction was that the market cap of the 4 major stablecoins would surpass that of Ethereum and become more than 50% of BTC's market cap. So as of this recording, the market cap of the top 4 is 116 billion. ETH is 194 billion. Half of BTC is roughly 250 billion. The question I have for you, Mauricio, are you sticking to your prediction, or would you like to make an amendment at this point in the year?
No, I think I'm going to stick to it. I think that stablecoins are, they've seen some headwinds again because of the banking issues that came out of the US, which frankly, if you look at the universe of the world of financial instruments where the trouble could have come from, I think very few people expected there would have been US banks where that problem came from. And I think that's, it's the financial system. It's the fact. It's the connection between stablecoins and the traditional financial system that is holding them back, because the traditional financial system is the one showing the cracks right now. The problem is not in the stablecoins. The problem is that people, because they know that a USDC works with US banks, they've now, because of the experiences of earlier in this year, they've now said, oh, wow, should I be reconsidering how safe this is, right? But again, that was a moment in time. I think trust is gradually building back. Look at the announcements from Visa recently. Visa is now going to start settling transfers with USDC on Solana. Like, that's massive. So I think, again, it's a circumstantial setback to adoption. I don't think that this changes the totality. In fact, I welcome users to see this play out in real life. Go to Google search trends and pick last 5 years and go look at Argentina and go look at Venezuela and look at the search trend interest between Bitcoin and stablecoins. And you'll see that Bitcoin was far surpassing it for many, many years. But now the difference between the two is it's very tiny. And it's going to remain tiny until they overlap, because more and more people need to transact in dollars around the world vis-a-vis the people that need to save in Bitcoin. Again, the ability to save in Bitcoin is something that comes after you have become successful and have some assets to save. But the desire and need to transact in dollars for your everyday life is real. And it's going to override in the short term the need to save in Bitcoin. So I think, a lot of Bitcoiners talk about hyper-Bitcoinization and the world where fiat is no longer necessary. I don't subscribe to that view today. I believe the world will go through a hyper-dollarization phase before it goes into the Bitcoin stage or into a more digital reserve. Because again, it's just what the world knows and trusts to transact on, imperfect as it may be. I'm not suggesting here that the Fed is great and that they make no issues or make no mistakes. I'm just saying it's the cleanest dirty shirt and that people know and like to trade with.
I love it. Sticking with the original prediction. Got to admire that. Well, as I mentioned, Mauricio, we have 3 questions that we ask every single guest at the end of every episode of Show Me the Crypto. It's a segment we call You Had Me at Crypto. Ulf is going to ask you those questions.
All right, Mauricio, you ready?
Ready.
All right. The first question, who's your favorite person to follow in the crypto space?
Arthur Hayes.
Nice. Good
Cool.
answer.
Cool. Second question, what will the price of Bitcoin be 10 years from today?
10 years from today. I'm going to go with, what are we at? 29? 500 grand US.
Sweet.
I love
Sweet.
the amount
I
of
like
thought you put into that.
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah, that's good.
Well, 10 years, 2 cycles, 10x per cycle. It's kind of working backwards at it. I don't want to just bluntly or whatever, like without any thought, give you an answer, but I'm doing my best to guesstimate to the best of my
That's
abilities.
Good. That's good. All right. The third and final question, what is the most underrated project in the crypto space?
Without a doubt, Ledn.
So
If we had-
one of our rules is other than the product that you work for.
Right,
So other
no,
than Ledn.
Largely biased answer, of course. Underrated product in the industry. I think I have to say stablecoins. Just in general. I think most people that are in North America, where broadly most of the content gets generated and most of the thought leadership, even though I hate that term, but that gets generated up here, it's very biased. It's biased because it's never needed a stablecoin. And it's very easy to have bright names like Michael Saylor and stuff talk about the wonders of Bitcoin and the wonders and the technical superiorities of this, but you don't have the same passion for people saying how a stablecoin is allowing Maria outside of Bogota to save or protect herself from inflation. Because again, I've been through this. In hyperinflation, the way you got into Bitcoin was not because you were reading Andreas Antonopoulos's book and you saw the halving schedule and you thought, oh my God, this is a beautiful emission, and that's not how it happens. It happens because you get paid this worthless fiat piece of garbage that is evaporating every minute you hold it, and you start frantically calling everybody saying, can you sell me $1? Can you sell me $1? And people will say, no, I don't have dollars, but I have this thing called Bitcoin. That's what was happening back in my day. There were no stable coins. It was Bitcoin or the highway. And so you did Bitcoin to sell for dollars. Like very few people got into it on the first day wanting to hold it. You got it as a way of getting Bitcoin, as a way of getting dollars. And it was a way of getting out of your pesos. That was your first problem. Then you're saying, okay, how many dollars can I save off of this? It'll be more than what I can save off of the bolivares. That's the equation. But in today's day and age, if you go to Argentina, you go to a cueva in Argentina, which is where you go exchange money, and you will walk in and they'll say dollar this, dollar that, Tether on Solana, Tether on Tron, USDC on Solana, USDC on Tron, and you'll see them listed as dollars. And guess what? When you're in Argentina and you're trying to get rid of your pesos, when your banks don't support dollars, you have 2 options. You get cash dollars, which can be counterfeit, when you can lose all of your pesos, and they can be seized or taken from a government crony if they find that you have them and you didn't buy them from the almighty government. You can take those dollars, if you're so brave, to the local bank who has taken those dollars from you time and again, which you won't. Or in the past, that was really it. But now you can have a digital dollar self-custodied without a third party that can be used to pay a vendor in Nigeria to import a computer that you can use to sell it and start a business. Or you can take that stablecoin, park it in a place like Ledn, earn 8.5% interest, and use all sorts of financial instruments that weren't at your disposal before. That to me is financial inclusion. And that to me should be celebrated almost more than another tool for Americans to hedge their dollar inflationary risk, right? And so I do think that stablecoins are the ability to opt out of your local currency into one that you feel comfortable with should be a human right. If stablecoins cannot do that or fulfill that goal in the long enough term frame, like Bitcoin will do that. But today, I think both are serving as a safe haven for people.
Mauricio, above and beyond your ability to simplify and explain these complex ideas very in an easy to understand way, it's so cool to see your passion, to hear your story and how you've lived it and how you see the real life use case. Thank you so much for taking the time to join Ulf and I on this episode of Show Me the Crypto.
Anytime, guys. It's been a pleasure and always great to chat with fellow Canadians.
Thank you for listening to Show Me the Crypto. Please make sure to subscribe as well as rate and review this podcast.